This is Spinnaker3 and this video has been a long time coming. That's right, I'm finally going to be making a comprehensive guide on Mojo. So I'm going to be starting off with his base stats. And from the start you notice that he has a large health pool, which is very nice. But apart from that, there's not quite a lot in his favor. And what I mean by that is one of the biggest things that is bad about Mojo is right here. The block proficiency, because he only reduces incoming attack damage by 57.2%, which is well below average. Not to mention, he doesn't have the greatest critical rating, but that's a story for another time. So even though he has a large health pool, it is decreased by the fact that his block proficiency is so low that he's going to be taking significant damage through the block that it doesn't really make his health feel like it's that much. But that's besides the point. You know, Mojo still has quite a bit going on in his favor. And so let's take a look at Mojo's abilities. I'm going to skip the signature ability for now and start off with this passive. Now, all of his passives right here are basically ways of tuning Mojo to make him not be the most broken character in the game. So he has 30% less power from landing hits, and his physical resistance is decreased by 370.59. Now, this reduction to physical resistance is pretty substantial. Like I said, Mojo will feel squishy to play, and that physical resistance definitely adds to it. Additionally, Mojo gains 30% less power from landing hits. Now, this is to compensate for the fact that Mojo's power gain can get through the roofs, absolute bonker levels of power gain. So you really won't notice this 30% decrease that much. So let's take a look at what makes up the brunt of Mojo's kit, which is these things called audience prompts. So after the start of the fight, Mojo receives a random prompt from his adoring audience who want to see certain actions performed. These prompts last for 8 seconds. Now, essentially what you're going to see is a call out pop up in the left hand corner that asks you to perform an action. And as soon as you perform that action, you gain 1 million followers. Now, this is going to get very much into like social media territory, but Mojo revolves around followers and subscribers. And so you want to build up Mojo's followers as much as possible. So you want to complete these prompts that you're given. So the way that these prompts work is that if they expire without being completed, so if you fail to complete the prompt, then you lose 5 million followers. And we'll get to what your followers do for you later. Now, when a prompt is completed, you activate your anti-life field for 7 seconds. Now, this anti-life field is where so much of Mojo's kit is based around. This is how Mojo buff controls. This is how Mojo gets big damage. This is where the majority of Mojo's kit will lie. So you want to be completing these prompts as frequently as possible to get this anti-life field up. And as soon as you complete the prompt and the prompt expires, then you will have your new prompt cycle through. So that's as soon as your anti-life field expires, a new prompt will happen. And these prompts are paused during your special attack. Now that is big because this gives you a way of getting even more uptime on your anti-life field. Like, even though it says it only lasts 7 seconds, it means that you can bait out special attacks, and long specials don't matter, right? You can bait out those long specials and not lose so much uptime on your anti-life field. This is something that so many champions struggle with, where when they have something, baiting out specials really causes it to get problematic. For example, Silver Centurion's lock-on or Odin's buffs. All of these, as soon as you bait out a special attack, they completely disappear. Not Mojo. Mojo's anti-life field is always going to be up during the special attack. And prompts are unaffected by ability accuracy. Now this means that even when you have 3 neurotoxins on a Mojo as an Archangel, Mojo will still have his prompts be cycling. So it's worth keeping out in mind, but in my opinion, this is going to be primarily defensive. A few cases in where you're going to want your prompts where your own ability accuracy is being lowered, but like I said, you'll mainly notice this when it's on defense. Now let's get to his anti-life field. I mentioned how it's all about buff control. And that's because of this first line of text right here. Any buff triggered on the opponent has 90% reduced duration. Now that's big. The reason why this line right here makes Mojo so insane as a Mystic champion is because it gives him a level of buff control that no other Mystic champion has. Most Mystic champions revolve around nullify, right? That's how they control buffs. They nullify it off the opponent. Black Widow Clairvoyant has a special kind of thing called buff immunity where she's able to take away their buffs. That's a unique thing to her. And Mojo's uniqueness is an anti-life field. So instead of just completely nullifying the buff, he will cause it to have 90% reduced duration. Now this is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing when you have a lot of temporary buffs that the opponent is getting that you want to reduce and get off the opponent. For example, Aegon gains like a lot of temporary furies. Old Man Logan gains a lot of temporary furies. Those are super easy to buff control as Mojo. However, if you're facing an opponent like Venom, who has a lot of permanent buffs, it'll be a lot more difficult to buff control the opponent. So, in my opinion, this is a blessing and a curse. More so a blessing, but you can try this for yourself and see what you think. But the next line in this text is where Mojo's damage comes from. Anytime a buff is nullified or expires off the opponent, Mojo passively degenerates them for 1,806 damage over 6 seconds. Now, there are so many things in that text to break down, so let's just really quickly go through it. Anytime a buff is nullified or expires, that means that as long as your anti-life field is up and a buff just expires on the opponent, that's putting a degeneration on them. Any buff that gets nullified, that's putting a degeneration on them. And it's really key to notice that the word passive is in there. This is going to be a passive degeneration. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the difference between passives and debuffs, I'd recommend looking through it because passives are not treated the same as debuffs. What I mean by that is that if a champion is debuff immune, Mojo can still passively degenerate them. That effect does not get changed by any kind of debuff prevention on the opponent, which can get around so many different nodes, and I'll be showcasing that later in the video. Not to mention the 1,800 damage over 6 seconds, that really adds up. And the best part is that that scales up with your modified attack. So if Mojo has a Fury buff on him, which he happens to get from his signature ability, then the degenerations will do even more damage, which is huge for his kit. And furthermore, just like the prompt system, the anti-life field is paused during any special attack. Like I said, it makes it really easy to just keep it up, unlike champions like Sorcerer Supreme, where her nullification aura, when you're baiting out a special attack, it keeps decreasing. Mojo can keep it up for much longer. Now, I mentioned earlier about the followers, right? So what do these followers do? Well, they essentially give Mojo so much more in his kit. The first part is that if he's at 1 million followers, anytime a buff expires or is nullified, Mojo will heal 3% of his missing health over 2 seconds. Unfortunately, it doesn't stack, but it really doesn't matter. 3% of his missing health may seem like a small amount, but think about how many buffs are going to be on an opponent if you're taking advantage of like a Cosmic Champion or something. There's going to be quite a few buffs, and so you're going to be constantly having this regeneration topping you up, and it keeps Mojo really sustainable. I mentioned how Mojo does have a low block proficiency and he does feel squishy, but this regeneration really compensates for that and makes him feel so much more fun to play. Moving on to his 3 million followers, once he gets there, he can gain up to 50% of a bar of power based on how many followers he has. And this scales with your up to 5 million followers. So at 5 million followers, Mojo will gain 50% of a bar of power. Now, this is what I mentioned why he's tuned to have 30% less power per hit, because this is big, right? Anytime you have a prompt completed, gaining 50% of a bar of power is a lot of power gain. And this just really speeds up Mojo's damage, Mojo's rotation, and it makes him a super fun champion to play. Now, at 5 million followers, this is the huge benefit, which is that completing a prompt has a 100% chance to place a hater buff on the opponent for 20 seconds. Basic attacks have a 15% chance to place one. Haters have no effect. Now you may be wondering, if haters have no effect, what's the point of them? Well, recall that earlier, anytime a buff is nullified or it expires off the opponent, Mojo will degenerate the opponent and he'll gain health. But what if the opponent doesn't have any buffs? Well, Mojo can put buffs on the opponent. Just like champions like Dr. Voodoo can put a Loa on the opponent, Mojo can put a hater buff on the opponent. And you may be thinking now 20 seconds is a very long time. But remember, he has the anti-life field, which will reduce the duration of that by 90%, making it only tick for 2 seconds. So it'll be a really quick way of putting a buff on the opponent, which will give you regeneration, give you damage from the degeneration, and if you're running Mystic Dispersion, which I highly recommend running if you're playing any Mystic champion, you're going to be getting power too. So it is just a very powerful ability for a Mystic to have. Now, let's say you get a prompt that you don't like. Well, as long as you can throw a heavy attack, you can replace any bad prompt with a new prompt. And that's going to be really helpful if you get stun a champion and you're on a stun immune node. Well, you can't really stun a champion on a stun immune node, so you're going to want to use your heavy attack to replace it with a new prompt. And I'll cover what the different prompts are later in the video. Now let's start off with his special attack 1. It's a very small amount of text, and honestly, you probably won't find yourself using the special one that much. But this is where Mojo gets an actual nullify in his kit. His special attack 1 has a 100% chance to nullify a single buff from the opponent on the first hit. So this is sort of nice in very, very niche scenarios. I personally have not found many places where this is absolutely useful or necessary, but it is nice to have, right? If your anti-life field is not doing the trick because the opponent has a perma buff, this special attack 1 can get rid of it. It's nice to have. Again, it doesn't really fit into his rotation or his kit, so you probably won't find yourself using it that much. Moving on to his special attack 2, this is big, and I'll honestly combine it with the special attack 3 because these two go hand in hand. If the anti-life field is active, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be triggering a degeneration for every million followers Mojo has up to 5 million. So remember, every prompt you complete, you gain 1 million followers. And for every million followers you have, you're going to be triggering a degeneration on the opponent. So at 5 followers, which is the maximum that this special attack 2 scales off of, you will be placing 5 degenerations on your opponent. And once again, going back to the fact that it does 1,800 damage over 6 seconds, that is 9,000 damage already from your special 2 that's just being done to the opponent. And if that's scaled up by a Fury buff, whoo boy, the damage gets nuts. So the special attack 2 is probably what you're going to want to go for, because if you notice, the special 2 and the special 3 have the same text. They both trigger the anti-life field degeneration for every million followers Mojo has, up to 5 million. So if you have the choice between going for the special 2 and special 3, it's probably ideal to go for the special 2 because it costs less power. For 3 special 2s, I can throw off 2 special 3s. So that's the equivalent of 15 degenerations versus 10 degenerations. And obviously, we want more degenerations on the opponent, right? So the special attack 2 will be nice to have in most scenarios. But there is one caveat, which is the fact that the special 3 completes the current prompt. So this means that, remember what I told you before about how if you had a stun immune champion and you are asked to stun the opponent, you can throw a heavy, but that might be difficult to do in a stun immune matchup. So what you could do is you could save to a special 3 and it will instantly complete the current prompt. And what this means is that if you complete the prompt through your special 3, the actual updated follower count will be triggering the anti-life field degeneration. And what that means is that if you have 4 million followers, you are given a new prompt and you throw your special 3, 5 degenerations will be placed on the opponent because your current prompt will complete, putting you at 5 million, and then the degenerations trigger. So this order of operations is important because it means that throwing the special 3 can sometimes be more ideal if you're given very bad RNG on the prompts. Because it's worth noting, the prompts that you're given are completely random. So it's definitely going to be a bit tricky to get off some of these. But that's a story for another time. For now, I will go over the signature ability before I go over the possible audience prompts, because I do want to break those down further. The SIG ability is called Big Mojo Energy. Honestly, one of my favorite names for a signature ability. And it states that when Mojo activates his anti-life field, if he has at least 5 million followers, he gains a Fury buff for the duration, increasing attack rating by 4,692. Now that is huge. That is a huge amount of attack rating increase, because look at Mojo's current attack right now. It's at 2545. And this Fury buff is almost 200% of that attack value. So this is a very massive Fury buff, and that means that each degeneration is going to be amplified by that much more. So think that Mojo is getting triple the attack rating, so these degenerations are almost going to be tripled in their potency. That is a lot of degeneration damage, and that is where honestly most of Mojo's damage comes from. But that's not even the best part, right? This is obviously a SIG 200 thing, where at SIG 1, Mojo gets a Fury buff that's equal to his attack rating. So the Fury buff actually scales really well. It goes from 100% to 200% of his attack rating, which is always going to be a substantial increase. So everyone asked me, do you think that Mojo should be max SIG? My answer is, of course it would be great to have him at max SIG, right? Getting 200% Fury is big. But even having him at SIG 1 is amazing, because it unlocks the rest of these awakened ability. And I think a lot of people overlook that part. They're always swayed by the big Fury buff. But this last 3 bullet points makes Mojo so much more fun to play. Basically, Mojo gets a persistent charge system, where if he ends a fight with more followers than he had at the beginning, then he gains subscribers, and he can never lose followers below the number of subscribers he has. So what that means is each fight that you take Mojo in, Mojo will get stronger. And Mojo will get so strong by after like 3 fights in the quest that he gets to his anti-life field and 5 million subscribers and followers so quickly. And that is crucial because, like I told you, so many of his additional benefits come from having 5 million followers. So being able to start fights right away with 5 million followers is amazing. And that all comes from signature level 1. Now, to address the elephant in the room, I'm often asked if Mojo needs his awakening. And as much as it pains me to say this, I really don't think I would use Mojo that much if my Mojo were not awakened. Just because his awakening makes him so much more useful to play, to the point where I want to use Mojo over the likes of Sorcerer Supreme, Black Widow Clairvoyant, Doctor Doom, because I can just go into fights, get stronger, and have loads of degeneration damage that are being amped up to 3 times their original potency. That speeds up his damage to a level where it is so much more playable, and I don't have to spend time just ramping up Mojo, because the ramp up process, I will admit, it can get tedious if you're starting from 0 every fight. So truth be told, I would highly advise that people look for the awakening on Mojo, but as soon as your Mojo is awakened, even SIG 1, I would say take him up. I would say play him wherever you can, because he is so fun. Now I'm going to talk more about his actual audience prompts. There are quite a few of these. So any one of these are fair game, and I'm going to be breaking down what it takes to do most of these right now. But most of these are pretty obvious, right? Activate a special attack, that just means you activate a special attack. Charge a heavy attack, you charge a heavy attack. It's very simple and straightforward. But what makes it a little bit more interesting is that these prompts don't just need to be completed by you as Mojo. If you read this, it says if either champion does what the audience wants. So even the opponent can complete the prompts for you. And that's big. That makes prompts like block a hit, hold block for 1.5 seconds. Think about it. With a champ like Mojo, you don't want to be blocking. But if the opponent blocks instead, that completes the prompt. So you don't need to even take block damage to try and complete these prompts. The only one where that's not the case is inflict a stun, because you don't want to really have the opponent inflict a stun on you, or you don't really want the opponent to punish your special attack. But a lot of the other ones you can get by having the opponent complete it. Now the first prompt can ask you to activate a special attack, and this one is pretty self-explanatory. As soon as you get this prompt, either you or the opponent needs to activate a special attack and use up a bar of power. Like Winter Soldier just threw his special, the prompt completed. It's that easy. Up next is charging a heavy attack, and obviously it's easy to get this after a parry, so it's easiest to perform this prompt yourself. But in the off chance that you're unable to get an opportunity for a heavy, you can hold block and let your opponent throw the heavy instead to complete the prompt. The next one is dashing backwards, which in my opinion is the easiest. You get this prompt, you swipe left, and that's it. Up next is blocking a hit, which may seem easy, but with Mojo's block proficiency can be problematic. You can either block it yourself, or you can dash back, play passively, let the AI turtle up, and then hit their block to get the prompt done. The next one is using dexterity to avoid a hit, and the key is that you have to get the dex to avoid the hit. So you can do this by dashing back from a basic attack, or like I do here, dodging a special. This is one of the trickier ones that I've optimized, which is holding block for 1.5 seconds. Now, luckily, that's around the duration of a parry stun with the good masteries, so with only one blocked hit, you can actually complete the prompt. But let's say you don't want to take any block damage. Well, you can turtle up, like I talked about before, to get Winter Soldier to hold his block for longer, and that'll complete the prompt. I'm sure anyone with a parry mastery knows how to inflict a stun, but with the parry mastery, as soon as you perform a well-timed block, a stun is placed on the opponent, completing the prompt. The next prompt involves ending a buff, which in my opinion is most easily done with the dexterity mastery. Avoiding a hit places a pause precision, and hitting the opponent turns it into a buff, which then expires to complete the prompt. The next prompt is backing into the corner, and remember, this applies to both you and the opponent. So you can hit the opponent enough times to back them up into the corner to complete the prompt, or if you want to do it in your corner, you can sort of dash back all the way, complete the prompt, and then maybe use a special to get back your space. Up next is the idle prompt, and I personally think Kabam coded the AI to get a bit more defensive when this prompt comes up, because I find it a lot easier to complete than most people think. But as long as you stay in the same place for 1 second, the prompt is done. The next prompt is punishing a special attack, which requires you to counterattack when an opponent throws a special. And unfortunately, some champions don't have punishable special attacks like Captain Marvel, but for the most part, this should work. Finally, there is the knockdown prompt, which can be completed with either a heavy attack or a special. Here you notice I parry and then heavy to complete the prompt. And that about wraps up Mojo's prompts. Now, it may seem straightforward, but the reason I'm including it in this guide is because some of them are highly optimized, like the holding block prompt can be completed without taking loads of block damage. And it's important to understand how to complete each prompt because it's essential to playing Mojo and it's essential to playing him well. Now let's get into Mojo's synergies. Now, a common theme with Mojo's synergies is that they are nice to have, but they are completely unnecessary. And so I'll start off with this one with Longshot, and you'll see what I mean. Longshot gives Mojo a 50% chance to not lose followers when failing a prompt. Now, again, losing followers and failing a prompt can be awful. But luckily, you do have your awakened ability that can help mitigate that because you have these subscribers and your followers can never fall below your subscribers. So that definitely adds to a fact that makes this less useful. And also the fact that it just isn't guaranteed. 50% isn't guaranteed, right? That could very easily just not happen and you still lose all your followers. So it's, again, one of those synergies that, yeah, it's nice to have, but I'm never going to find myself relying on it or really opting to have it. Because your goal in a fight should be to complete every prompt. You shouldn't be aiming to stop and fail a prompt, right? So that's why I think that the synergy really isn't that great. Moving on to the synergy with Psylocke. When the opponent completes a prompt, Mojo steals 10% of their current power. That's nice, right? Like, Mojo can get a little bit of power, but again, this is when the opponent completes a prompt. So if you complete the prompt, then you're not really going to be getting the power. So once again, this really isn't something that you can rely on because it's tied to RNG because your prompts are completely random. And it's, in addition to that, it's tied to the opponent completing the prompt instead of you. So that's why, this is a pretty tricky to really use effectively. But hey, it's nice to have a little bit of power when it counts. So if I have a free slot on the team, I could put it on. It's not going to be that big of a deal. Now, this next one with Modok, he does actually have uses in the game. And once again, reliability is nice. Heavy attacks incinerate the opponent, dealing 80% of Mojo's attack rating as energy damage over 6 seconds. Now, first of all, Mojo's attack rating scales up with the Fury buff that he gets from the Awakened ability, so this can be a substantial incinerate. And this can help Mojo because having the ability to put a damaging debuff on the opponent, especially with an incinerate, does have its uses in the game. And I'll be actually showcasing a solo of Selective Timestream using this synergy. But once again, apart from the extra damage and the niche utility it provides, it's not really a necessary synergy to Mojo. Up next is this one with Korg and Hulk. When a prompt is completed, Mojo gains an unstoppable buff for 5 seconds. Now, before the likes of Dragon Man was really in the game, because Mojo did come out before Dragon Man, this made Mojo one of the best, if not the best counter for Can't Stop, Won't Stop, just because having an unstoppable buff is so rare in this game, and Mojo can deal out significantly more damage than the likes of Juggernaut. In fact, Mojo can deal out quite a lot of damage compared to most of the top champs in this game. So this actually can have its uses in a situation like Can't Stop, Won't Stop. Again, apart from those niche situations, this isn't a synergy that I will be opting for to have on most teams. However, I will say and point out the fact that Korg gets a huge benefit from this synergy, but that's a story for another time. Now, the synergies that I think matter the most for Mojo and the team, you don't actually need another champion for. Because with himself on the team, which if you have Mojo on a team, he's going to be with himself. Mojo gains 5% extra power gain, which is good for his power gain because he does have quite a bit of it. And he gives all the other champions on the team 7% offensive combat power rate. That's enough to make up the difference of a star rating because in case you didn't know, as you get to a higher rank for a champion, like a rank 4 champion to a rank 5 champion, they gain a plus 5% offensive combat power rate, or just combat power rate in general. And so giving this extra 7% elevates them even higher, which is just so nice to have, right? Who would ever say no to more power gain, power combat rate, right? So this is just a very nice synergy, and the fact that it comes from himself and you don't even need another champion to get it is just so nice to have. Now, the next two synergies are synergies that aren't actually with Mojo, but they really elevate him to another level. And the first one is with Guardian, which gives plus 1000 block proficiency, and this actually scales with the rarity. This is on my 5-star Guardian. At a 6-star, it's plus 1250, but that's besides the point. The point here is that Mojo's base block proficiency is pretty low. So this plus 1000 block proficiency is a very big increase, just considering diminishing returns and all, because it really lets Mojo block a lot more without taking so much damage back and letting him be a lot more sustainable to play in the long run. This next synergy is with Black Widow Clairvoyant and Ghost Rider, and what it does is it reduces the duration of buffs by an additional 30%. Now remember that during Mojo's anti-life field, he reduces buff duration by 90%. Well, this is additive, so it actually ends up reducing buff duration by 120%, which is a substantial decrease. It means that buffs against regular old opponents will be completely gone. Like they won't even last for any amount of time. And against opponents with enhanced buff duration like Hyperion, Mojo's anti-life field is an additive and subtractive reduction. So this really helps get them even shorter. Like when you're fighting Hyperion's power gain, which is extended by his Sig ability, this can reduce it even further. Over here, we do have a synergy with Jubilee that gives Mojo and any synergy members here, which would also be Longshot, plus 10% max health. And I did cover the fact that Mojo does have quite a beefy health pool, so plus 10% is actually a significant health increase. But again, this really isn't the most important synergy, and it's with Jubilee, who's a champion that I know some people like, some people don't. I personally like her, but I don't really care enough to use this synergy that much. But hey, if you want extra health because you find yourself playing Mojo and if he feels too squishy, by all means, this synergy could help you keep Mojo a little more sustainable. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a spider ham to show this off, but I do want to cover something that really confuses me, and that is Spider Ham's synergy with Mojo. Now, whenever one of the opponent's buffs expires or is nullified, pause the anti-life field for 1 second. On paper, this synergy seems great, right? Mojo's anti-life field is where his buff control comes from. That is where his big fury buff comes from. So if you can pause the anti-life field duration, why wouldn't you? And my answer to that is quite simple, which is that when you are trying to ramp up Mojo, you don't want to pause that anti-life field, right? It is painful to have to keep having the anti-life field get paused, and you want the anti-life field to end so you can get your new prompt, so that you can get more power gain from completing the prompt. You can get more health from putting the hater buff and regenning and gaining power from Mystic Dispersion. All of these things, all of Mojo's kit is not just from the anti-life field, but it's from having the anti-life field and then not having it and then getting it back. Because that action of getting back the anti-life field gives Mojo a lot more of his kit. It gives him his power, it gives him his health, it gives the buff on the opponent. All of those things are just mitigated when you're pausing the anti-life field, especially against opponents with a lot of buffs. So this synergy, I really don't know how to feel about this synergy, because I guess it's just highly situational. I have personally never found a need for this synergy because it's going to be active the whole quest. It's not like you can choose whether to activate it or not. So your first few fights ramping up Mojo are going to be a nightmare unless you're playing against an opponent with just 0 buffs. And that's obviously not going to be as fun of a time. So I don't know how to feel about this synergy. I just wouldn't recommend using it because I personally do think it makes him worse. But it's going to be really up to you. I'd still recommend, don't just take my word for it. Try it out. See if the ramp up is still fine for you. But once again, a lot of Mojo's kit comes from completing prompts, not from just having the anti-life field the whole entire fight. So just be careful there, because there are a lot of fights where this can just mess you up. Now, I don't want to end on that downer synergy from Spider-Ham, so here's a synergy with Hood. If you have Mojo and Hood together, you'll get plus 3% perfect block chance. Once again, won't find it that useful, but in my opinion, it's more useful than that Spider-Ham synergy. So now that I've talked the talk, it's time for me to walk the walk and show you how effective Mojo is in actually doing fights. Now I have some new fights and some re-uploads, but they'll still be just as entertaining. So this first one is from 7.2.3, and the nodes are Vigor, Supercharge, and Mystic Ward. So notice that Mystic Ward prevents you from using most Mystics, because originally you'd maybe thinking to nullify the Supercharge power gain and the regeneration from Vigor, but Mystic Ward really prevents that from happening. But remember, Mojo doesn't nullify. His anti-life field just shortens the durations of buffs. So he actually gets around Mystic Ward. And you notice right there, the Vigor and power gain triggered, but they were completely gone in an instant. And so that is just an amazing kind of interaction that allows Mojo to get through these things that, they're trying to design this to be mystic proof, but Mojo doesn't care. So you notice as soon as those power gain and regen expires, they're turning into degenerations. And right here, since I got pushed to a special 3 on accident, I used it right as the prompt expired, so this will complete my next prompt and set me up with my anti-life field up and ready to go. This is also the first fight I'm using with Mojo, so it is a little slow to get ramped up, but now I have my Fury buff and it's time to go to town. I'm landing these light intercepts, and that's like a hidden aspect of Mojo that I really like, which is that his light attack has a lot of reach, so it's very effective for light intercepting. And you notice that right here, I threw that special 2 and it kept my anti-life field up. Those power gains are instantly expiring. It's almost like there are no buffs on this Ronin because that's how much uptime I can have on this anti-life field if I play my cards right, if I complete the prompts when I need to. You notice there I was also able to stall out the anti-life field by throwing my special attack, which allowed it to be just in time for the timer on Vigor to re-trigger and Vigor to happen, so that the Vigor could get shrunk down to nothing by the anti-life field. So knowing how to stall out your timer with special attacks is an effective strategy. Here I get punish a special attack and I'm able to just retaliate against that special one fairly simply. And the rest of these degenerations, once again, they do so much damage, 2.5k per tick, and Ronin drops. I mean, apart from the Human Torch that's earlier on this path, Mojo is just incredible for this entire lane. Up next is the notorious Crossbones fight from 6.1.5 that served as a roadblock for many to getting into Cavalier. And this fight was changed a lot, so now he has Arc Overload, which is going to serve as a lot of buffs for Mojo to take advantage of. He has Power Struggle on the global, which means I can only gain power when he does. And he places a poison on me. Now, Mojo isn't poison immune, so I've brought along Nick Fury and Deadpool X-Force to purify that poison right at the start of the fight. But you notice that I'm probably not going to be able to get a special 2 in this fight, right? Just because in order to for me to get my special 2, I have to push Crossbones to a special 2, and his special 2 does a lot of damage. I'm not trying to get into that. So instead, I'm going to play this fight as if I don't have any specials. And what that means is I'm going to just be completing prompts and nullifying buffs. And I'm not nullifying buffs, I'm expiring them with my anti-life field. And so you notice that Crossbones has a lot of buffs for me to take advantage of. First and foremost, Arc Overload is giving him an armor and a regeneration, and those are both buffs I can take advantage of. Not to mention Crossbones' innate abilities gives him Furies on Special 1 activation and on Overrun activation. So I'm going to definitely try and time some Overrun activations, or at least attempt to, and see how that works. So I'm also utilizing the light intercept that I talked about. I really, really recommend trying that spacing out if you can. You literally just have to hit into the opponent and then dash back in light. You don't even have to hit into their block, just hit them, dash back light. It lands so often, and when it doesn't, it's safe to back off. But my point is, yeah, I did get hit around a little in the beginning. I'm not trying to get a perfect fight. This was my first time going in. I really don't like this quest that much, so I'm trying to keep out of it as much as I can. I really only went here just to make this video. But the point is, Crossbones is almost halfway down, or he's over halfway down. And I haven't really been doing, not any special attacks. I've literally just been using Mojo's base kit. All of his hater buffs, all of his prompts, and his expirations for degenerations, all of that is just combining for massive amount of damage in this fight to take down one of the most notorious bosses. I mean, I'm taking him down without needing to really parry much because I'm using that light intercept. And I'm triggering overrun sometimes to just give him even more furies for me to take advantage of. Just a really nice interaction in this fight. So right here, I triggered Overrun, and you saw it trigger. He got the Furies. He got even more buffs. And like I said, I have a giant Fury buff that's scaling up those degenerations. And it's just making me hit even harder. So this fight is almost done. Just have to land a few more hits, and the degeneration should do the rest of the work. And with that special 1 and counter back, Crossbones drops. Now, this next fight is very annoying. It's a Quake on Flux Dispersal and Limber, and this is in variant 5 3.1, which means I can only use Mystics and Symbiotes. And so here I wanted to check if I was recording, but the difficulty in this fight is that Flux Dispersal reduces your damage for every charge on Quake, and she gains charges just by you hitting her. And the only way to reset those charges is by throwing a heavy attack. And in order to throw a heavy attack with most champions, you want to parry and then heavy. Limber makes that very difficult in this fight because parry heavy timing is going to start getting very off. So the other option is to hold block and then heavy counter the opponent's heavy. But if you let Quake charge a heavy on you, she's going to deal some serious damage through Aftershock. And as a Mystic with class disadvantage, I'm not looking forward to any of that. So I'm going to play this fight as if Flux Dispersal doesn't exist. And look at what happens. Even though Flux Dispersal is at 20, my basic hits are doing 0, my passive degenerations are still doing damage to Quake. And the reason for that is because Flux Dispersal states that only when being struck or like hits will get that damage reduction. But Mojo has these passive degenerations which completely bypass that effect. And so I'm able to deal out a ton of damage. And here she does get some heavy charges on me. I definitely did not play this fight perfectly, but I was mainly trying to showcase this aspect of how this was a very tough fight. But if you play your cards right, Mojo can just be incredible because look at all of this damage that he's just completely bypassing. And all of this degeneration damage is the only thing taking her down, but he's still managing to put in a lot of work against a variant health pool opponent, which is a significant chunk. So this is just a testament to how good Mojo is and how his degenerations can get around a lot of effects. In fact, just from my testing alone, I've seen his degenerations get around nodes like Special Connoisseur. He can deal damage without the prowess. I even used him on a Act 7 lane. He can also get around Mercy, and he can get around all of these random damage reduction nodes. And right here with that special one, Quake dropped even though Flux Dispersal was at 20 charges for almost the entire fight. Now, up next is a very fun Mojo showcase in Act 7.2.5, and this is the Rage Power Shield Hurt Locker node. So what this means is that Power Shield will amp up your special damage, but Rage means that if you deal more than 2.5% of the opponent's health in a single attack, they'll gain a Fury, and at 5 Furies, they'll be unblockable. So most of the time, you'll really be wanting to go for a strong Mystic Nullified champion, but because most champions will just start hitting the rage damage cap because their specials are going to be amped up like crazy, and then they'll end up making the opponent go unblockable, which will lead to a very difficult fight. So you might be wondering why I'm using Mojo, because I talked about how Mojo has a really weak nullify, and it's an incredibly weak nullify, in fact. And that's why my plan in this fight is to not use my nullify. My plan in this fight is to use my special attacks. But there's something special about Power Shield's interaction with Mojo. And so watch right here. I have my special 3 banked, and right here I throw it to complete the prompt and get my Fury. And this special 3 is going to be boosted by Power Shield, which means it will definitely trigger Rage on Psylocke. But watch the degeneration ticks on Psylocke afterwards. As soon as this special 3 is completed, she starts ticking 5.5k damage every half second. That's 11k per second. Mojo's degeneration effects actually get amplified from the special attack. So you notice I throw my special 2 right here. The last hit crits, it triggers Rage again. But watch the degenerations. They're doing so much damage. And she's already down to 50%, and I've only triggered 2 stacks of Rage. That's how powerful this strategy is. By alternating between special 3s and special 2s, I'm avoiding the Hurt Locker damage, and these degenerations are just putting in so much work. Now, if I really needed to play this in a much larger health pool fight where I need to worry about the Furies, I could throw an occasional special 1 here and there to nullify a Fury from my special 3, but here it's completely unnecessary because he's just going to finish this fight so quickly. And as soon as I get out of this special 3 and I dislike Psylocke to oblivion, the degenerations once again will be amped up. They'll be ticking her down like crazy. And legitimately, all I'll need is 1 special 2 at the end, and this fight should be over. So let us just see how that goes. I get my power gain from the prompt completion. I throw my special 2. She does go unblockable right at the end here, but it doesn't matter. The degenerations finish her off. And this is a tough fight if you're using the wrong champion, but Mojo just makes it such a piece of cake. Now, up next, I have a re-upload that I thought was just so incredible that I needed to include it in this guide. And that is a solo against the 7.1.6 Gwenperion boss. Now, this boss has high energy diet and selective time stream. Now, high energy diet means that she kind of regenerates any kind of energy damage. And selective time stream means that every 20 seconds, if she doesn't have a shock or incinerate on her, she will heal back to full. And remember, Modok, I mentioned this earlier, his synergy with Mojo gives Mojo a 6-second incinerate on his heavy attack. And the selective time stream timer is 20 seconds. So as long as I launch a heavy attack when the timer is about a quarter of the way from cycling, she will not heal back to full because she'll have an incinerate on her. So that's all I need to do. You see right here, I launch the heavy attack, I get the incinerate, and the incinerate just expires as the heal happens. So this was sort of me getting acclimated to this fight. It was my first time taking this fight. So I am just trying to ramp up Mojo, get the special 3 going because I'm there. And Gwenperion doesn't have a special 3 activated. It's nice that none of the mashup bosses from 7.1.6 have the special 3 activated. So she has this special 2, and I realize right here, I can heavy counter her special 2, which is a very nice thing to know because that means it gives me another opening. Because one thing to note is that this Gwenperion does have Hyperion's abilities, which means that she has a power gain every now and then. So if I'm constantly baiting out specials, I'm not going to find a good opening to get my heavy attack in. So I need to make sure that I have those openings. So knowing that I can heavy counter her special 2 is big. Now, another thing that makes Mojo great for this fight, like I mentioned, Gwenperion does have Hyperion's abilities. So he's going to be basically shrinking down her buffs quite a lot. I mean, she does have the Sig ability from Hyperion, which does give her a little extra buff duration, but that's kind of irrelevant here. I'm still going to be turning those buffs into degenerations, which is very nice. Now, unfortunately here, the selective time stream cycles, but I've gotten used to this fight at this point, and I am determined to not let it cycle again. So the only way I'm going to do that is by making sure I land my heavy with around a quarter of the time left on the selective time stream timer so that she doesn't heal back to full. And spoiler alert, it's pretty easy to do once you're used to the fight, and I don't actually let it cycle again. So right here, she throws a special 2. Like I told you, I get the heavy counter. That Incinerate is going to last, and it lasts long enough to prevent her from healing back to full. And now that I have quite a few followers built up, thanks to completing all the prompts from earlier, I am not really worried about letting these prompts fall off, and I'm just going to be constantly in my big damage phase. And that's important because this Gwenperion does have a lot of health. It's pretty easy to make a mistake. I mean, right here, I was very close to letting that Incinerate fall off and letting Gwenperion heal back to full. So it is just so important to be able to nuke her down as quickly as possible just to reduce the amount of selective time stream windows that I have to manage. So that's why you notice in this fight, I'm not too worried about block damage. I've also brought along Guardian because, like I said, that Guardian block proficiency synergy is just so nice to have. And Guardian himself is a great champion that I don't feel bad about bringing him along and wasting a spot on the team. And I noticed sometimes I do miss the heavy counter, but here it didn't matter because I was able to land the parry heavy. Because I have access to an easy parry heavy in this fight, there's no limber, nothing to mess with my parries getting stuck on Gwenperion. I'm able to really get those incinerates landed. So this is what I meant when I talked about that Modok synergy being nice, because it does give me extra damage in some fights where it's just nice to have extra damage. Granted, with Mojo, you're not going to be throwing too many heavies, but in a fight like this, it is imperative that you get those heavies off. So right here, she throws a special 2. I just need to heavy counter it. Bam, I get the heavy counter. I'm back up to a special 3. In case you haven't noticed, my power gain has been quite high in this entire fight. I've actually been constantly pushed up to a special 3 because I run 4 out of 5 Mystic Dispersion, and Gwenperion has a lot of buffs. She either has my hater buffs, which feeds Mystic Dispersion, or she has her regular power gain, which is feeding me as well. Not to mention the fact that completing a prompt at this point in time gives me 50% of a bar of power, which is quite a significant power gain. So right here, I missed the heavy counter timing, but luckily I'm able to get a parry and then land the heavy again. And right here, I'm able to punish the special, throw my special 3 again. My special 3, I'm using it more than my special 2 just because my special 2 has a lot of energy hits, which she will heal back. But my special 3, she can't actually heal that back. Anyway, I'm getting to the home stretch of this fight, but again, with selective time stream, you're simultaneously so close to finishing the fight, yet at any point in time, if it goes wrong, you're back to just full health, having to do the same thing all over again. And I'm already back to a special 3. Like I said, I get to special 3s so quickly in this fight. And it's just so safe because I'm baiting out so many specials, which means I don't have that many opportunities to actually hit Gwenperion, but I'm still able to fit in all of these windows of attacking the opponent just because my degenerations do so much work. And with that, Gwenperion drops. Now, that's a very tough boss that I was able to solo with Mojo. Now, up next is what I think is the magnum opus of all fights I have done with Mojo, because one, this is how I actually got through this Mr. Sinister boss in 6.2.2, and two, I kind of discovered a new way of playing Mojo that gives him a lot of utility. So to start off with, Caustic Tempers on this fight, which means Mr. Sinister will take 90% reduced damage from all sources unless you have a Fury buff on yourself. And if you attack into Mr. Sinister, you have a 50% chance of putting a poison on yourself. So very restrictive conditions. And you may be thinking Mojo doesn't have poison immunity. And you're right. So my goal in this fight is to not hit Mr. Sinister. At least not without a special 3 banked. Because my special 3 is just one hit, but it does around 10% damage to Mr. Sinister, which is a significant amount. So my goal in this fight is to complete prompts. Because remember, every prompt I complete gives me 50% of a bar of power. And the buff expiring on Mr. Sinister gives me an extra 10 because I'm running 4 out of 5 Mystic Dispersion. So that's 60% of a bar of power, and I'm trying to get up to 3 bars of power, which means about after 5 prompts completed, I should be at a special 3. And my special 3 is only one hit, which means that my special 3 will just only have a 50% chance of putting a poison on me, but it'll do so much damage back to Mr. Sinister that I'm not worried about having a single poison on me. Now, the one caveat of this fight is that I'm going to be taking a ridiculous amount of block damage just because it's literally just parrying and completing prompt, parrying and completing a prompt. So that's why I have brought along Guardian to make Mojo a little more sustainable. And you see right here, I get the poison, but luckily it's not too much. I am also running a bit of willpower, so I'm able to heal back a lot of the damage that I'd be taking otherwise. And so I'm actually winning this health fight. I know it doesn't seem that way right now, but I did start off the fight with less health than Mr. Sinister. So it is definitely a big concern of mine that I will send Mr. Sinister and give myself too many poisons. But at this point, like I'm confident that this strategy is good because all I'm doing is holding block. I'm literally camping out Mr. Sinister, but I'm able to just overload him with more degenerations than he can handle. And that's allowing me to effectively quote unquote power control Mr. Sinister and bypass Caustic Temper. And because my Mojo is awakened, I have almost 100% uptime on this Fury buff just because I'm only completing prompts when I'm doing damage. And so I am able to keep up this Fury buff when I have a degeneration on Mr. Sinister. So he's not actually reducing a lot of my degeneration damage, which is good to know. And it's a very good thing to have because that means that I can get through a lot of this fight without having the pain of 90% reduced damage, which is a big damage reduction. Now, I know this can seem a little boring at first, but if you're really out of options on a fight, and believe you me, I was completely out of options on this fight when I was first coming across it, having this kind of option is really nice because you notice Mr. Sinister has barely thrown any specials. So this is actually a form of power control. At the same time, I'm barely contacting Mr. Sinister, like in terms of hitting him. So I'm able to keep that Caustic Temper ability under wraps. So this new way that I quote unquote discovered of how to play Mojo, I kind of coined it the Mojo and Go Slow just because it's accurately defining what you're doing. You're using Mojo and you're going pretty slow. But what the effect is you're able to take down one of the toughest Act 6 bosses, which is this 6.2.2 Mr. Sinister. I know quite a few people who were roadblocked on this fight because they didn't have Heimdall. They didn't have the Warlock with the Uprising synergy to get the Fury buff. Lots of things can go wrong with this fight, but Mojo is really able to mitigate a lot of those factors. And honestly, I'm not doing too shabby in the health department despite the amount of blocked hits that I'm taking. And because I'm at 4 subscribers or 5 subscribers, I'm never actually dropping my followers down by failing to complete a prompt, which is important because sometimes I'll get a prompt that I just can't complete. Throw a special attack when I don't have a special and he doesn't have a special is going to be a problem, right? Because I'm trying to not attack Mr. Sinister until I have a special 3. So I can let the prompt just disappear and not have to worry about going down to 1 follower and then having to work myself back up for the Fury buff. So this is what I mean when I say that his awakening is super useful. And you notice right here, I am so close to getting Mr. Sinister down. And to be fair, it is a 5-minute fight, which is slightly slow, but it's really not as slow as it could have been with other options. Here, since I'm so close, I just tapped him to get up to a special 3 with that power gain. And after this special 3 drops and dislikes Mr. Sinister, he will go down. So this was honestly a really impressive Mojo showcase, and it just shows a really different way of playing him that does involve patience, but the results are absolutely worth it. So overall, just in conclusion, Mojo is a really great champion. I mean, I know he has his flaws. I'm never going to be ranking him above Black Widow Clairvoyant, Sorcerer Supreme, or Doctor Doom, who are considered the top of the Mystic class. But Mojo is seriously underlooked, in my opinion. A lot of what he does is just not given credit for. And that's why I really wanted to create this guide. And there were things that I couldn't even include in this guide. Like, I have used Mojo in war, especially against the pesky Footloose node. I have used Mojo to bypass a lot of annoying things and power control opponents because I barely have to touch the opponent, like you saw in that Mr. Sinister fight. So I've used Mojo against Vivified as literally my best Vivified counter because there's not a lot of things that you can really do against Vivified. And so there's so many things that I just wasn't able to include. So if you really want to check out some other Mojo videos, I have a playlist on my channel linked to a bunch of Mojo gameplay. I would definitely recommend checking it out. Overall, I really enjoyed making this guide, and I truly hope that you were able to learn something new that you didn't know before, and maybe gain a bit of appreciation for Mojo and the kinds of things he can do for your roster. Sure, he may not be the greatest, he might not be as sustainable, but if you play him properly, and if you learn him a little more, learn the ins and outs of him, he can be a very effective addition to your roster. And I think you will find yourself using him just a little bit more. So if you enjoyed this video, I would love to hear your comments on what you thought of it, things you might want to see improved, any kind of comments or things that you have, places you've used Mojo, and leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more content. I mean, I really love Mojo, so you can rest assured I will be putting out some Mojo content soon. So thank you all for watching and have a great one.